You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, and here to talk with me about the assembled Avengers, well, at least after Endgame, is John Mills.
Indeed. I'm here in this idyllic town to talk to you, Matt, about the assembled Avengers and everything that happened afterward. After one played, say, an Endgame.
Yes. After the Avengers broke up, I guess. I mean, people died, people left, so...
Listen, Matt, even the Beatles broke up, okay? We can't hold on to the past forever.
This is true. Anyway, it's going to be so fascinating as we start walking through Series 4, Phase 4, whatever you want to call it, that is happening. And we actually know that Phase 4 is going to end soon, which is crazy. That's a question that we didn't know when we were doing this show originally here, and we got through all 3 phases, and we're like, well, we don't even know when Phase 4 has an ending, but we do know it actually ends, as we're recording this year in 2022 with Wakanda Forever, Black Panther. So,
wait, I thought that came out in 23. That comes out in 2022?
No, it comes out this year in November. So,
why did because I was thinking of the first one with February. Listen, the big deluge of stuff we've had. So long to go without that giant Marvel deluge of content in the movie theaters that I legitimately got turned all sorts of around about what's happening, because now I know we're going to build the not Civil War. We already had Civil War. We already had Infinity Gauntlet. We're going to build the Secret War.
Secret War, the Kang Dynasty. I mean, that's what we're actually building towards. So at least it's nice to be confirmed actually what we're trying to do, so that's fantastic. So I guess we can keep that in mind as we look here at Phase 4 as well. But before we do that, thank you so much for joining us here in the 602 Club's Assembling Avengers. We're excited to be back. Make sure that you do a few things. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. Subscribe so you get the show as soon as it drops. If you're on a podcatcher, any of those type of places that allows you to review or rate, please do that with the 602 Club. We would really appreciate it. Share us with your friends on social media. You can follow us at the 602 Club or on Instagram at 602 Club TFM. We'd love to interact with you that way. Of course, you could find us online at Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, or the entire network. There's the listeners-only discussion group you can check out called the Babel Conference. And go to Trek.fm and see all that we're doing across the entire network. Last but not least, we really appreciate it if you would go over to Patreon and become one of our patrons. We can't do this without you, and we need your help. So you can go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. Okay, so John, I think as I was thinking through how to even start this, I came up with a question, because Phase 4 starts completely differently than all of the other phases. Because we're not starting in the theater. We're starting on D+. And so how did that sit with you as, we get this news and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to start doing TV shows. And in fact, our first Phase 4 thing is going to be WandaVision on Disney+.
It seemed logical at the time because of the fact that everybody was in the fever of everything must become streaming. Everything must be on our different apps and everything. And so when they announced it, I wasn't shocked. It was, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess this is what we're doing now. And because it sure seemed at the time that was what everybody was going to do. They were going to fully embrace that nobody was ever going to go to a movie theater again. And it was all about getting content on your platforms. Cool. I was on board with it. And after The Mandalorian, it seemed like that really was the way to go. Because, okay, we got serialized storytelling here. It works. So what about you? What was your general reaction to it?
It seemed a little bit odd to me, to take the cinematic universe, the Marvel cinematic universe, and make it less cinematic because it was going to be playing at home. To me, it was an odd choice just because this whole thing had been built in the movie theaters. And I think it was also a little bit strange to me just because I was not sure how much of the momentum you would be able to keep. It is much easier to get people to go to the theater to watch a movie, especially when they've been trained to do so, like, Pavlov's fan. We got a new Marvel movie come out, everybody go to see it, makes $1 billion, and we move on to the next one. But one of the things that we'd always mentioned is that this series had already seemed almost like a television show. Mm-hmm. And so now we were literally just going to make television shows with it. And yet I honestly, yes, The Mandalorian did great and everything, but I'd already seen how Star Wars could work on television really well with the Clone Wars and everything. But I just wasn't sure how this would fit in. Like, you're now requiring people to not only see every movie, but have to watch every show, which is not just 2 hours of their time, but is, 6 to 10 hours of their time.
To be fair, it was also during the, there were other factors at play where it sure seemed people were going to be spending a lot more time at home, for an indeterminate amount of time. And so, regardless of anybody's feelings on anything, that's just the way the world was.
Sure.
And so
yeah.
I don't think that necessarily sways that because as we get into it, WandaVision always seemed very much built for this medium. And I think that a question that sort of springs naturally from this, I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves here. Feel free to course correct me or anything, but the question that immediately pops to mind for me is encountering this material without getting too deep into it. Do you think, does it strike you as likely that this was a movie that they adapted for streaming, or does this strike you as something that was always intended for streaming?
No, I don't think that jumps ahead too much. Because there's another question there that I definitely want to get to closer to the end. But I never really considered that, whether or not this felt like a movie that they turned into a show. And I would say that I think that this does feel like something that they approached through the lens of it being on television. So much more of it is less of the massive spectacle that you get, except for the finale of the show. And it feels more like a TV show. And then, of course, there's the whole concept of this show, which is you're walking through television history with Wanda and Vision as you kind of revisit, classics like the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Brady Bunch and, yada, yada, yada. And all the way up to, say Modern Family. We're doing that. And so it almost felt like, to me, the idea was, hey, we're doing this on TV, we have this idea, and this is the perfect way to kind of sell why this show should be on Disney Plus, because it's feels like it's supposed to be a celebration of television in and of itself, just as we visit these different eras, which, all the kids watching, half of them haven't seen any of these shows, so it doesn't matter. Honestly, I think we're the last generation, you and I, that really would get the Dick Van Dyke Show, unless your parents are just really good parents and they made you, watch great television. So,
and the Dick Van Dyke Show stands; it remains as one of the greatest television shows in history.
100%.
I will have that fight. I will go down swinging on that fight 100% of the time because Dick Van Dyke is literally somebody who's a once in 100-year talent. And the supporting cast as well. That's not to slight the cast at all. And I know this is sort of a rabbit hole.
The entire cast of that show
couldn't have been better.
It couldn't have.
It was writing, casting, everything was right. That was the medium of television during the black and white era, firing on every possible cylinder 100%. At the same time. Absolutely amazing show. But that said,
how do you feel about that? I mean, let's flip it around. Do you feel like this felt like a show or a movie that they had turned into a show?
No, but that's because this conceit, I don't think, works in a 2-hour movie.
Mm-hmm.
It could, but I think the episodic nature of a series is necessary for this conceit even to work. Because you can jump from hour to hour, and it feels like a natural progression and natural breaking points because it's a different show every time.
Yep.
Where I come at it with the conceit is something you touch on about, okay, you and me, we saw these sorts of shows in reruns as kids growing up because UHF stations had to show something when I was a latchkey kid in the summer. So that's how I saw all the classic television, was all the stuff that cost them 2 cents to run. They threw it up there. Now, to invert what you're talking about, I had to have somebody tell me that it was a Modern Family reference because I never watched that show. And for a hot minute, it took me a little bit of brain power to say, oh yeah, Malcolm in the Middle. Because that show, I'd forgotten even existed until this made reference to it. So I think the challenge here with the conceit is there's no way for it to navigate the deluge of 60 years worth of content and format changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you, I mean, I think it works a little bit to the detriment of the concept of the show.
Sure.
How do you feel about it? Do you think that this was the right concept for them to go for?
Yeah. I think that in the sense of storytelling, it works. But I think what it does for them is that it creates this desire for them to pretty much spend an entire episode per show they're mimicking. And they become, I think, a little bit too enamored with their own concept and premise. And it doesn't... A lot of these episodes, I feel like, just should have been combined. Because I didn't feel the need for there to be so many episodes, especially, I'd say, like the first two. You could put those together and find a way to combine, I think, a lot of the other episodes. And it would have been more interesting, I think, too, because it would have had more of that jarring effect to let you know, even from the beginning, that something's not right here by having the whole visual framework of the show change mid-episode, where you're like, wow, that's kind of a whiplash, to go from Dick Van Dyke to the Brady Bunch, that quickly. The same way in which, they do the whiplash of, like, the kids growing themselves up, that's great, but I just feel like they're kind of so enamored with their own conceit and their own concept that it doesn't allow them to see that they don't actually need these episodes to be separate. They could combine a lot of these things and make for a shorter series, because this is a 9-episode series. And I'll say is that there's no need for this to be 9 episodes at all.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I would offer that it's enough to go generic so that people understand the time periods being referenced. So, because black and white television, Dick Van Dyke is top of the pops for that. But so is I Love Lucy, which is an amazing sitcom in its own right. You can hit an era and people will know what you're going for without it being quite so specific. And I would go a step further and say, a wonderful twist would have been, instead of having entire episodes dedicated to each moment in time, as it were, to have the final minute, suddenly the aesthetic changes to generic 70s sitcom look. So that imagine at the end of that first episode, everything's going through with black and white. You're like, well, this is weird. What's happening? This is odd. Okay, this is like a Dick Van Dyke episode. And then all of a sudden at the end is Brady Bunch. And then credits 1 minute later. Right. That would have left you on your heels saying, wait, what just happened? And I think would have prepared you for the idea that it was flipping.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit better. Now, the thing is, I'm not trying to rewrite the show, obviously. I'm just saying that I think that we're both hitting on the fact that it's an interesting concept, difficult to execute. And I'd say that in terms of the concept, the tiny frustrating part about it for me is it's almost there. Like, it's right there. Like, I'm with them. And I think that's why I stick with the show all the way through, is because it's interesting and it's different. And I like what they're trying. It's just, if you're going to have an honest assessment, you have to give your honest assessment of things.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the thing that made this interesting to start phase 4 on is because the whole thematic element here is grief and dealing with grief. And of course, Wanda is representative of one of the Avengers who has lost a lot. Not just because of Infinity War and Endgame, but her entire life. And so to have this ability then to kind of come into this new phase and to deal with the reality of grief, which is also interesting because, it's then somewhat representative of the entire world where people have just popped back into place, and so you've got worldwide grief happening. They don't touch on that too much, but, this kind of gives you a framework there. How do you feel like that ends up working here in the show? Because it's really the main thrust of the show, especially by the end.
It works okay. I have a difficult time, and the thing is, this is where I might jump ahead. I don't know. I'm not trying to, but I understand it's talking about grief. I understand and knowing where it goes, and I might have felt differently earlier in the series until I got to the end. But in all honesty, what's difficult about this is, rightly so, because she's the main character, it gives primacy to Wanda's grief, which makes sense. She's our main character. We're spending the time with her. We care about what she's going through. But at the same time, I don't think that it does a good enough job conveying that everybody is grieving through this. And that, I think, undercuts it a bit because it gives so much emphasis on one aspect of grief as opposed to the fact that it's multifaceted, that it comes in stages.
Right.
And as a result, because they're so caught up in the concept of everything, I think that we don't ever see Wanda actually progress through those 5 stages that we all know, right? It's a denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, and we go through those phases in different ways and in different order. But those 5 phases are pretty much agreed upon as pretty much what people are going through when they're grieving.
Yes.
And I don't see Wanda going through those. And I think that would have really helped the series, is you could have kept this concept, to your point, shrunk it down to 5 or 6 episodes and had each chunk represent a stage. where she's working through until at the end where we are at acceptance. And it feels, I would argue that it would have felt more earned than what we get with the final product.
Yeah. I think that you've really hit on something that's really key to the show, which is the idea of what they're going for. The idea of understanding grief and how to deal with it is really important, right? And, I think there is actually something that's really beautiful in the show. Wanda is having that moment where she's going through everything with Agnes, and she's reliving that moment where Vision tells her that what is grief but love preserving. That it's this loss of the person that you loved and that continuation of the love, but without the person there, that's what that is. And I think that's really beautiful, and I think it's absolutely true, and it's really poignant and everything. But I think what you touched upon is the thing that really, I think, hurts the show, is that Wanda never moves from one place to another in her grief. She stays in the same place. And by never moving, it's also what makes her unlikable by the end of the season, because there's been no movement for her. She's not sorry really for what she's done. She doesn't really even almost seem to care about what she's done. We're left with this invitation from Monica Rambeau where she says, "Oh, they'll never know what you gave up for them." So we're supposed to only think about Wanda in this situation as if she's the only victim here, except that she's not the victim. She's the perpetrator of an incredible evil on an entire town of people who would rather die, literally rather die, than be under her control anymore. So you're 100% right, is that this show never gets us to that point. And frustratingly, that is kind of the point, because that's what leads us into, of course, the multiverse of madness, and she's got the Darkhold, and of course that's jumping the gun. We're not there yet, but
I haven't seen it either. Spoiler warning.
So, you saw you saw the stinger here at the end where she's got it, and so I think that's the thing with me that just left such a sour taste in my mouth, is that the show wanted you to feel bad for a character who is actually the evil villain of this whole thing. And that's what really bothers me about the entire series, because I'm never really truly caught up in the grief of Wanda, because I'm too focused. It's pretty clear from very early that there's just something completely not right about this whole situation and what she's actually doing. And it's like, okay, I just can't feel sorry for you when you're subjecting this amount of people to this, all to suit your own whims and desires. Like, that's evil.
I can't disagree. We both love Star Wars very much, and it sure seems to me that Wanda has gone full Sith in this series.
Oh, she's like Anakin on steroids.
Yep. Where she has, Anakin did do a few things which are arguably worse. At least the people in the town she didn't slaughter. She may have had put them in a living hell, but at least they survived at the end. Anakin did cross a couple other lines, let's be honest. But I'm going to ask you a question that I think gets to your point, and it's a question that I'm just asking myself now as we discuss the show. But in all honesty, we know that Agnes is an antagonist. They telegraph it early on, and then we got the big reveal about where she comes from and everything. right? But can you tell me what the substantive, moral, or ethical difference between Wanda and Agnes even is? Is there any? Because if not, then my antagonist, who I'm supposed to treat as a villain that I want Wanda to vanquish, I don't understand why I would care whether either one of them win. I feel more pity for Vision at the end of this, who has been given the sweet release of death and is dragged back from the grave to exist as something he's not quite sure what he is anymore. He's almost like Frankenstein's monster now. He was this beautiful, accidental creation of one of the Infinity Gems, and now he's this colorless monster that's not sure if he wants to be a hero or not. Like he flies off at the end, and I'm like, so what's up, bro? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that you have a really good point in that, and what it comes down to, and the problem is I think that it's too little too late, is that Wanda is willing to save all of the people, but basically after everybody knows what she's doing, and when her own power basically is being threatened. Because it's not as though she knows at this point she's not going to be able to keep this family. She's not even going to be able to keep Vision. And so really it comes down to her protecting herself and her own power against somebody who would take that from her. And so I think you raise a great point, which is I'm not left in a place where I really care that much about the main character, because what she's doing is not heroic whatsoever. And you're 100% right that this whole show kind of in the background being about them trying to bring back Vision is terrifyingly sad because of the way in which this character is treated as just this avatar of Wanda's pain. And she doesn't even care what it does to create this version of him to just try and satiate her grief. She doesn't really care about him, because there are times we see in the show where she literally tries to make him do what she wants. She just wants meat puppets, basically. And it's just a little bit terrifying that that's the case. Yes.
And speaking of bringing characters back, I think that this is an organic moment to just jump right at that one. The gimmick of bringing back Quicksilver, but having him played by the guy from those 20th Century Fox movies where they bought the studio so that Iger could have that franchise worked back in. What a gimmick. Do you think it was a good gimmick? Do you think it was a cheap gimmick? Or is it somewhere in between where you saw it first and you said, oh, cool, and then it wore off? Or was it something you were totally on board with the whole time he was there?
I think it is a cheap gimmick because it means nothing in the end. It had nothing to do with them kind of trying to start to, peak the idea that mutants exist, which, spoiler alert, as we move through Phase 4, there are going to be references to mutants. And so it's frustrating that this doesn't actually play into that it's actually just a cheap trick for everybody to be like, hey, and then it turns out in the end, he's just an actor who has been bewitched to play this part by Agnes. And
you know what?
That is frustrating.
Full stop. I honestly, as much as I love that they went into Dick Van Dyke, but also something that I think would have been great, because I do believe it's a show that bridged the black and white to color gap, just to go back to the concept, I would have been so much more interested if more of this show had been framed as a Bewitched concept. The show Bewitched.
They don't do it long enough.
More of that, and because then you could have really leaned into the actors changing sort of idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, the husband switches, between seasons. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, really. That's just a random thought popping into my brain. Feel free to edit it out later if you want to. But I'm right with you, where for a half second, it was that moment of, oh, hey, it's the other Quicksilver. And then after that, it was, oh, it's the other Quicksilver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, they need to address Quicksilver because it's part of her grief. But the whole time I'm watching this, I'm thinking to myself, did they not want to bring, was it an Ed Norton situation where they just didn't want to bring the actor back? Or was it,
Yeah.
So I know that there are plenty of people who would disagree with us on this, and I respect that. I understand it. It's just, for me, it doesn't work as well as it should have, and I think it actually pulls me out of the larger arc because it's so meta that it reminds me of the conceit on top of the conceit on top of the connected universe.
Right.
And so it just sort of sags under its own weight, if you will.
Well, and I think, it's kind of interesting because they do that, they bring in all of these other characters like Monica Rambeau, and then they bring in, Darcy, and then of course they also bring in Wu. We've seen all of these characters in other places, whether it was Ant-Man or whether it was Captain Marvel or, in the Thor movies. And so, which, in many ways, when you're doing a show like this, it does make sense because this feels even more, I guess, in some ways comic booky, because you just kind of bring in these characters that, characters in comic books pop up in each other's things all the time. And so I think that's something that's, it doesn't bother me or anything, but it was one of the places where I felt like this series was doing a lot of things, and especially them trying to set up the idea of Monica Rambeau becoming Spectrum, which I'm guessing is going to play out in the Marvels movie, and then possibly,
Sure.
I mean, she didn't even play out in Miss Marvel, which was kind of strange to me. So
spoilers, haven't seen that one either.
Yeah, so
remember, this is something we didn't tease enough at the beginning, I don't think. I know very little about Phase 4. There's a whole lot of it I haven't seen, which is making me really look forward to this sort of thing. But to your point, imagine how this is too big a word, but how bewildering it is for somebody who might have tapped out a little bit further down the line. I'm sort of terrified, and bringing up Monica Rambeau is a great example. I'm sort of terrified to progress through Phase 4 because it sure seems to me, based on this show and some of the reactions to later stuff that I've seen and what you just dropped a hint about, Miss Marvel, it seems to me that I need to be bracing myself for a little bit of disappointment, whereas I might have been very pleased with the first 3 phases overall, with the exception of Thor Ragnarok. And that would be like, how much trepidation should I be approaching Phase 4 with? How much of a warning signal was WandaVision, I guess?
Well, I mean, it's going to be really interesting because I know there are things that you haven't seen. There's actually some things I haven't seen. I never dove into the What If series, and so there's some things like that I haven't touched that we're going to be getting to. So I think, again, it's one of those places where, you brought all these characters in, and, in many ways, like, I don't have any problem with Darcy being in the show, but in all honesty, her role could have been really filled by anyone. At least Monica Rambeau's story, her getting her powers has to do with her going through the barrier multiple times, and it triggers in her that change. So that's how she becomes Spectrum. So, okay, that's well done. I have no idea. I have no problem with Randall Park as Jimmy Woo being here because he was in Ant-Man. He's hysterical.
He's a delight. I think
he's one of the best parts of the show.
He's a terrific comic actor. He's he's one of those actors that I always enjoy seeing because he's incredibly gifted in terms of the facial expressions that he can make, because film is a visual medium. It's very important for the camera to like the person on the other end of it, that the lens is pointed at. And I think the camera loves him.
Yeah.
And he has that just natural charisma that just can light up any scene.
Yeah.
And so I think he's a joy to have in this show. I honestly think he kept me going at certain points.
Yeah. I do have a question, though, is that what we end up having is it's not SHIELD, but we have another acronym named organization called SWORD here that apparently Monica Rambeau's mother helped start, that I don't remember ever hearing about in any of the other parts of phases 1, 2, or 3. So this feels like a new addition, and it just seemed very strange that we had this brand new organization that wasn't the Department of Damage Control that we get in the Spider-Man movies. It's not SHIELD, it's SWORD?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Which the name... Okay, look. I'm willing to let that one slide, specifically because of the fact that, especially, I hate even, pulling this sort of card or whatever, but growing up so close to DC Metro, there are agencies within agencies where people who work at the agencies don't know that the agencies at the other agencies exist and or don't. This is completely believable government to me, where it's like, oh wait, there's another one that does the same thing but slightly different. Funny. And they both just soak up money so that, okay, cool, I get it. Like, take a stroll through the Pentagon at some point, and there are legends. There was a guy who set up an office in the Pentagon back, I want to say it was like the 70s or the 80s, where he literally just walked in and sat in a janitor's closet the same way that Elaine did in Seinfeld, so that she could order her favorite Chinese food that wouldn't deliver to the other side of the building that she lived on. Like, it's completely believable that
that's great.
You walk in and it's like, oh, SWORD. I didn't hear about SWORD before. That's okay. You didn't hear about the NSA until you heard about the NSA. And nobody knows about S7. They know about Area 53. They don't know about S7. Oh, wait. Oops. Did I invent something? Sorry. Okay. I don't want to get blown up before the end of the show, so I'll stop talking.
I think one of the questions that I have to come to here, which I think is really important, as always with these shows, is we talked a little bit about the end and our disappointment in it, but I think what strikes me the most is that there's literally no repercussions for Wanda.
Not a one.
No punishment, anything. Nope. Like, how is that possible?
Well, she's an Avenger, and that's why? Question mark? That's about it. That's all I got for you. Sorry. I got nothing else.
Yeah, it leaves me with a really, sour taste in my mouth, that not only do we treat this character as if we should feel sorry for her, but then we don't deal with the repercussions that somebody this powerful has done something this awful, and we just let her like walk away. It's cool. You know, just don't, nobody even goes like, hey, maybe just don't do that again.
Yeah. Or, honestly, embrace it at the end and have her basically say, I'm the bad guy. That's interesting to me, because that means the next time I encounter her, then I can look at this as her episode 3 and say, oh, okay, we have to redeem her. And even Anakin expresses regret at the end of episode 3. Even though we know Darth Vader is one of the biggest bastards in the galaxy. I know, another Star Wars reference, go figure. But listen to Aggressive Negotiations. But even at the end of episode 3, Anakin has a moment of regret. Even though he's become one of the worst evils in the history of the galaxy, he still has that moment of, oh no, what did I do? For Wanda not to have that just doesn't feel right. Even if she goes off to be the bad guy, there should at least be a moment of, oh, I really screwed this one up, didn't I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I think it really hurts the show, and it really hurts the character and me really caring about them in the future. And so one last question that I have for you, which is, this is the first Disney Plus show in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're used to big screen spectacle. I guess maybe I have 2 more questions, but how does the show look? How did it feel? Did it feel like it fit within the cinematic universe? Did the effects work for you? I mean, obviously that's hugely important in a show like this to feel like it fits within what came before on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks interesting. I'll honestly say it looks more interesting and consistent than Thor Ragnarok. This is one of their better efforts visually, I think. I do think that it's, at the very least, within the context of each episode, cohesive. And I think that a lot of the color replacement stuff that they did was very interesting. And I would argue that they come out swinging with this one. It looked like they spent the money to get it where they wanted it to be. And so, sure, visually, I'm down with it.
I agree with you. I think one of the things that really helps them is that their conceit that they are mimicking all of these TV shows means that they can look like a TV show. That's great. Sure. It's real smart.
But I would also point to the fight between Vision and Anti-Vision at the end. That's just what I call it, folks. But Vision and Anti-Vision, their fight is really well done.
Yeah.
Really well done. That's the type of, like, I look at that and I'm like, that would have held up on a big screen to see that fight.
Yeah.
And so I would have been down with that for sure.
No, I agree with you for the most part. I think the show does look pretty stinking good for the most part. And what would be interesting is to see if that quality holds up in the successive shows that we're going to get. I mean, we get Falcon Winter Soldier and Loki and Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, She-Hulk. I mean, so all of these shows keep coming out, and to see if the quality stays the same is going to be really interesting. So the last question, I think, for me, that I continually kind of ask myself as I'm watching these shows, and I would like to do as we walk through this, is should this have been a movie instead of a TV show? Could they have done this and done it more successfully in a 2.5-hour film rather than, for this show, 9 episodes?
I think they could have done it. I do. I think they could have done it. Should they? I don't know. I think that's one of those ones you can't ever answer. We talked about, like, did it seem like they adapted for... It doesn't really seem like they had a finished script and then they said, now we have to turn this into a TV show. So at the very least, this feels like it was written for television.
Right. Yeah.
Which is not a knock. But it's writing for a different medium. Just like writing for a novel is different than writing a screenplay, is different than writing a comic book, is different than writing, and so on and so forth. So should it have been? I'm going to say no, but I do think it should have been a shorter show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think that, especially as rewatching this, as I have to get ready for this, because it's obviously been a very long time since I've seen this series. I think that what would have made this show a better show is that if they had shortened it. And I think 6 episodes at most is probably what would have been needed. I think it would have made it a better show, and it would have maybe made some of the thematic elements just feel more cohesive, better, because there's some of the places where I do feel like there's a little bit of, not filler or whatever, but they're just becoming kind of too enamored with their concept and premise, which is we're shifting through all of these different TV series from the past. And so with that, then I guess, John, what are you going to rate WandaVision?
Are we just going with stars, or are we saying hexes? Like, what are we saying here? What's our scale? Are we being cutesy about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we should do hexes.
All right. I'm prepared for the torrent of whatever's coming at me with this one. Sorry. It gets a 2 out of 5 from me. This is not something where I really was in love with it, and it burned a lot of my goodwill away by the end of it because I did not care for how it wrapped up. That's just that's it to a T. If I had been more down with where they got her at the end, and to give full credit to Elizabeth Olsen, she gives a great performance. This is the material. This is on the material. This is not on her. She showed up to work. And I can honestly say that I just wish that the underlying material had been up to her performance and not vice versa. So 2 out of 5 for me.
Man, I couldn't have said it better. 2 out of 5 hexes for me as well. I think this is a disappointing beginning to Phase 4. I think it is bad character development. It's good character assassination. And that's really what hurts it, is that I don't really care about the character of Wanda by the end of this, but I'm really interested to find out what happens to Vision. So, those 2 stars really come into play there. But yeah, and it again, it's not about the acting. You nailed it. Elizabeth Olsen really gives a great performance through all of these episodes. She is put through the ringer when it comes to what she's trying to portray. I just don't think the show works in the way that they want it to. And part of that is by allowing this character to get away with almost murder. We'll call it mind murder of people for an extended period of time and pretend like that's fine. I'm sure it's fine. So, but John, as always, it's time to now rank the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we begin Phase 4.
Oh, man. Come on, bro. I didn't come prepared for this. So
Isn't that what your letterbox is for, John?
I guess so. You know what? I'll just come at it and I'll say this. This isn't bottom of the heap. I still enjoyed it more than Captain Marvel and Thor Ragnarok. So I'll figure it out by next time. But it's definitely lower third. Precisely where I still have to mull on that a little bit, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything that Marvel delivered before this moment in time was gold. So I'm going to kick the can down the road, and I'm going to say, let's see how Falcon and the Winter Soldier holds up on a rewatch and see how this shakes out.
It's a good question. And I did come prepared, so everybody knows me now as the better host of the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
That's why you get paid twice as much as I do.
Exactly.
2 times 0 is nothing.
Yes, I'll run through real quick. Of course, Winter Soldier #1, because that's never going to be dethroned, I don't think. Iron Man 3, Civil War, Endgame, The First Avenger, Black Panther, Guardians 2, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Incredible Hulk, Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man and Wasp, Avengers, Far From Home, Infinity War, Thor, The Dark World, Iron Man 2, Thor, Howard the Duck. That's right, we threw that in there. So if you haven't heard that, you guys should go back and listen to that. Age of Ultron, Captain Marvel, WandaVision, and at the bottom still, Thor Ragnarok.
Okay.
But that's right. WandaVision is at the very bottom.
I'm going to go on the fly here. I'm going to go on the fly. Fine.
Oh, I love
Fine.
it. Yes.
Let's do this on the fly. All right? Y'all prepared for this? Same with me. Winter Soldier. I mean, I don't know how that's ever going to get toppled, honestly. Well,
unless Logan somehow became canon for the Marvel Cinematic Universe,
yeah,
I don't
pretty
know.
Much. Iron Man 3, Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Iron Man, Avengers Endgame, Black Panther, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Captain America Civil War, Captain America the First Avenger, Ant-Man and the Wasp, The Incredible Hulk, Avengers Infinity War, Thor, because you're wrong about that one, Spider-Man Homecoming, The Avengers, Howard the Duck, WandaVision, Spider-Man Far From Home, Thor the Dark World, Iron Man 2, Thor Ragnarok, Avengers Age of Ultron, and Captain Marvel, because at the very least, because these all of those came in at 2 stars, at the very least, WandaVision tried something unique and new and fresh, whereas everything that comes in after WandaVision for me is just something that tortured the formula to the point that I never, ever want to even think about it again.
And that's
but keep in mind, Howard the Duck, still better. Mm-hmm. Because Howard the Duck is at least insane in what it attempts to do. So
it's true.
There's our differentiating
factors. And it's tough
factors.
for me because Captain Marvel got 1.5 stars, but WandaVision got 2. But I'm not sure, honestly, which one I'd rather rewatch. Yeah, it's a toss-up, So, that may change in the future. Who knows? But, John, this is so much fun to be back here. Just to let everybody know, so because we're doing a lot more TV shows now in fact, we start off with 3 TV shows in a row. So what we're going to do is we're going to be kind of coming at this every month. There may be some months where maybe we've got movies back to back and it's a little bit easier to do that. Maybe we'll, double up that month or something. We'll figure that out when we get there. But we've got a lot of television shows to watch here, especially at the beginning. So we're going to be coming at you every month with more Assembling Avengers. Plus, you know what? It also just helps us stay a little bit behind the cinematic universe. So the whole point of this show is to kind of come at it minus the hype. And so right now we're going to be about a year or so out from when all of these things have come out. And that's a good place for us to be. So you'll be finding us in the 602 Club feed every month. Coming at you, of course, next we've got The Falcon and Winter Soldier, so you can watch that with us and be ready. But John, if people want to catch up with you and talk about how great your list really was, where would they find you?
Well, find me as Kessel Junkie out there online. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network co-hosting one show called House Lights, which looks at the works of directors through all sorts of zany combinations. And also as part of Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast of a unique sort with my co-host, who usually comes more prepared still to that one, Matt Rushing.
Well, and of course, you could find me all over the place here on the 602 Club feed, and of course, all over social media. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Vero under the name Matt Rushing 02. And then here on the network, when I'm not in the 602 Club or doing Snyder Cuts or assembling Avengers with John, you can also find me doing Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, Strange New Worlds. We got a show called Saddle Up, and Artificial Tango, all about Star Trek Picard. And then when I'm not on Aggressive Negotiations over on the Nerd Party with John, you can find me on a completed show I did with Drea Kaufman, where we talk about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time on Owl Post. But thank you so much for joining us.
Avengers!